Good morning, everyone. Speaker Belmonte Jr., Ombudsman Morales, COA Chairperson Tan, Executive Secretary Ochoa, distinguished members of the Cabinet, officials, partners from the development community, friends, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I'm very happy to join you for this conference on the UNCAC implementation and review for the Philippines. I'm very happy to participate in a discussion that reveals to what extent integrity and anti-corruption are essential pillars of governance and development, both for the Filipino people and also for the World Bank. Governance is at the heart of this administration's social contract with the Filipino people, very well reflected in the motto of where there's no corruption, there's no poverty. And at the same time, it is an important topic for the World Bank, leading to the creation of the global practice on governance that I have been leading for a few months since its creation. This was well reflected in July this year when the World Bank Group President Jim Jong Kim visited the Philippines and together with President Aquino spoke to a large audience here in Malacanan on the governance imperative. At that time, Mr. Kim pointed to the inextricable link between poor governance and persistent poverty, which this administration clearly recognizes. While the Philippines has taken enormous effort to strengthen governance and curb corruption, it was noted that the reforms and initiatives need to be sustained, that progress needs to be monitored, that evidence needs to be collected, and reforms need to be implemented in an effective way, and that the Philippines and other countries should share experiences with one another. So that's why I'm so glad to be here today, because this conference provides a good venue for a productive exchange of views and information on this important topic. It is noteworthy how discussing the UNCAC implementation brings together different powers of the state, different actors, government, civil society, and also brings different development partners. I think that that convening power reflects the common will of making progress in this very important area. With the rise of anti-corruption movement in the mid-1990s, the World Bank expanded its governance program beyond the public finance and civil service that had been the traditional avenues of support to countries, to support new accountability institutions, the rule of law, and legal and judicial reform. Then we combined anti-corruption with support to better management and also better service delivery. And as I will emphasize at the end of these words, this is a very important combination. It is not only important to eradicate poverty, it is also important to show the value of good governance in terms of the quality of services to people. We began then working also on the demand side of governance issues, deepening our engagement with civil society that is reflected in projects in many parts of the world, including the Philippines as well. This evolution continues today, recognizing the importance of putting in place mechanisms to hear and respond to people's demands for accountability and participation. This agenda is likely to intensify over time. This is not only reflected in the World Bank's agenda, but also in that of many different actors across the world and in the agenda of governments themselves. This is happening because society is now better educated, better informed, because there are new drivers of change reflected in the use of mobile technologies for monitoring service delivery, cloud computing, in the use of big data to detect and report integrity issues. There is improved domestic mobilization, greater transparency around extractive industries, and all these issues are gaining more and more attention, both in the face of the fiscal crisis in the more developed countries, and also as part of the development finance agenda. And you will see over the next few months these issues also be discussed in the context of the new Sustainable Development Goals. To align ourselves with the demands of our clients and rapidly evolving technological breakthroughs, the bank's approach has evolved, and the days of static best practice recipes are long gone. Increasingly, we are tapping into our multidisciplinary expertise, our capacity to nurture collaborative partnerships within and across regions. We are looking beyond World Bank sponsored projects. We are supporting policymakers' networks, supporting policy dialogue in regions and across the world in order to share good practice and also to learn from what others have done better, to mobilize that knowledge elsewhere when it's needed. In the end, our aim is to serve better our clients, mobilizing leading-edge knowledge, pertinent good practice, whenever it comes from, on a timely basis with financial muscle and convening power to support national agendas that are owned by countries. There is nothing that we can do that instead in the place of countries. It is countries that need to own these agendas. This is very much reflected in the work of the World Bank with the Philippines. With the Philippines, we have been supporting the good governance agenda for a long time, but especially stepping up this support in the last few years. We are proud of our support to the Office of the Ombudsman and ODESLA for the development of the Integrity Management Program of IMP, which is being scaled up to nationwide implementation through the issuance of the executive order that we are now being sharing. The Ombudsman is implementing the modernization of the system for asset disclosure called the Statement of Assets and Liabilities and Net Worth to make it more efficient and anti-corruption as an anti-corruption tool. The open procurement dashboard is operational. It features procurement and contract implementation information, including geotag map of the actual location and simple feedback mechanism for citizens who are beneficiaries of projects. But the Philippines is doing much more. Under the leadership of President Aquino, the Philippines doubled government budgets for social services and made performance-informed budgeting the norm. Actually, budgeting provided a very good basis. It is important to unify a single treasury accounts to ensure that the basis for public management in terms of the movement of financial resources is there to serve many of these programs. Your Open Data initiative has reinforced accountability at all levels of government. The Philippines is now using electronic procurement technology to encourage citizens to be observers in all stages of the bidding process and started the use of geotagging. Similar tools are now being used to monitor assistance for people affected by Typhoon Yolanda. So I would say that why I'm mentioning all these measures, some of them may not fall exactly into what we understand as anti-corruption. But as I mentioned at the beginning, what matters most is to what extent anti-corruption is a part of a broader agenda that is aimed at providing better services to citizens to respond to the mandates of society. That is what makes anti-corruption especially important, and also what it makes anti-corruption feasible. Because when people see the results of good governance, then corruption is surely on the way out. I think that this provides a very strong basis for the future work between the bank and the government of the Philippines and other development partners. Earlier on, it was mentioned that this was my first visit to the Philippines, but the World Bank has been here for a long time, will continue being so, and we are definitely returning to conduct a deeper discussion on how to build more sustainability to this agenda, to project this into the future, to create the basis for the new steps that may be taken, and to ensure that governance and anti-corruption is a process that is continuing over time and that is here to stay and to make a definite mark on the development of the Philippines. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. The President will be arriving shortly. We would be asking the Honorable Speaker, the Honorable Ombudsman, the Honorable Executive Secretary to join the President on stage when he arrives.
Malayo na ang narating ng Pilipinas pagdating sa pagtahak sa tuwid na daan. Iwinaksi ang mga dating gawi at hinahabol pa ngayon ang mga nagsamantala sa kapangyarihan at nagkamal sa kaban ng bayan. Sa pangunguna mismo ng Pangulong Benigno S. Aquino III ay iwinawaksi ang dati ng nakaugaliang kultura ng korupsyon sa bansa. Ngunit hindi po maitatanggi na may ilan pa rin na humihiwalay sa landas na tuwid at pangsariling kapakanan lamang lamang ang iniintindi kaysa sa kabutihan ng sambayanan. Kaya naman po patuloy ang pagsisikap ng pamahalaan, katuwang iba't ibang sektor ng lipunan para tuluyan ang buwagin ang sistema ng korupsyon sa ating bansa. Kabilang na po sa mga hakbangin ng pamahalaan ay ang pakikipagtulungan sa international community, partikular na po ang United Nations. At ngayon pong umaga ay ihahatid namin sa inyo ang Second State Conference on United Nations Convention Against Corruption o UNCAC Implementation and Review. Ako po si Cathy San Gabriel, nag-uulat live mula sa Heroes Hall ng Palasyo ng Malacanang. At ngayong araw nga po ay ginaganap ang ikalawang State Conference on United Nations Convention Against Corruption, Implementation and Review. Isang pagpupulong po yan para pagtibayin pang international commitment ng ating bansa bilang isang state party sa advokasya ng UNCAC. At nakita po natin na nandito ang iba't ibang mga opisyal ng pamahalaan. Nandito po si House Speaker Feliciano Belmonte, Senate President Franklin Drilon. Nandito rin po si Supreme Court Chief Justice Maria Lourdes Sereno at Ombudsman Conchita Carpio Morales. Ngunit pangungunahan nga po ni Pangulong Benigno Aquino ang aktibidad ngayong umaga upang ipakita ang commitment ng ating bansa sa pagsugpo sa korupsyon. Narito rin po ang ilan sa mga representatives mula sa World Bank at United Nations at iba pang mga development partners ng Pilipinas. At ano nga ba ang mga tinalakay sa komperensyang ito? Panoorin po natin ang ating naging panayam kay Terence Jones, ang UN Resident Coordinator and UNDP Resident Representative. Mr. Jones, what were the things tackled in this conference?
Thank you. I would like to emphasize the importance that all the organizations that are involved in tackling anti-corruption in the Philippines have come together and are now more organized to collectively support the President in his anti-corruption drive.
And what is the perception of the Philippine government's fight against corruption?
I think generally, while the global indicators still show much room for improvement, what we've seen over the past years is steady improvements in those indices. So the Philippines is going up the chart because of the efforts by the President and his colleagues to address anti-corruption.
Do you think these efforts are help drive the economy upwards in terms of credit rating improvement and other things?
Yes, of course. It certainly gives a lot of confidence to the business sector, I think to civil society, that their efforts are going to be rewarded and therefore their investments are encouraged because, in fact, the level of integrity, the level of transparency and accountability is seen to steadily improve. And that's a very important dimension, I think, of giving confidence to the investors and society that they can see a positive future.
You said, Mr. Jones, that there's still room for improvement. What are the recommendations?
One today, I think, is the coming together of all the organizations to assess progress against the legal requirements of the UNCAC, the United Nations Convention. Secondly, the importance, I think, of generating public information to give confidence about the good things that are happening so that the public themselves can reinforce the progress that's being made. Another, I think, effort is to decentralize a lot of this work to the local government units so that people see the impact nationwide and not only through the national institutions. And the United Nations is certainly now assessing with the Office of the Ombudsman and other institutions how we can support the further implementation of the government's policies and programs to stop corruption.
Mr. Terence Jones, UNDP Resident Representative, thank you so much for your time and good day to you. Kanina po sa pagsisimula ng pagpupulong ay nagbigay ng kani-kanilang summary reports ang representatives ng Presidential UNCAC Interagency Committee. Nilagdaan din ang mga nagawang resolusyon sa Second State Conference na ito at nagbigay ng kani-kanilang mga mensahe ng pagsuporta ang mga kinatawan ng development partners mula sa UN at World Bank. Nagkaroon din ng policy responses tungkol sa mga gaps at challenges sa mga UNCAC review reports. Magbibigay ng kanilang policy responses sina Chief Justice Maria Lourdes Sereno, Ombudsman Conchita Carpio Morales, Speaker Feliciano Belmonte at Senate President Franklin Drilon. Matapos po nito ay ipipresenta naman ni na Executive Secretary Paquito Ochoa Jr. at Ombudsman Conchita Carpio Morales ang Second State Conference Resolution. At bago magtapos ang pagpupulong ay magbibigay ng kanyang mensahe ang ating Pangulo. Ano nga ba ang mga hakbangin na isinasagawa naman ng Civil Service Commission para masugpo ang korupsyon? Alamin po natin yan sa ating naging panayam sa kanilang Chairman Francisco Duque. Chairperson Duque, kamusta po ang laban ng Civil Service Commission kontra korupsyon?
Malakas ang amin laban at napaka-epektibo. Alam mo, bilang bahagi ng cluster on the rule of law, 5 kasing key result areas yan under the Philippine Development Plan at kalahok dyan ng Civil Service Commission doon sa cluster ng rule of law, social justice, security, and the rule of law. At kami naman, bilang constitutional commission, ay ipinatutupad namin ang mga sumusunod na batas. Ang Republic Act 6713, which is the Code of Conduct and Ethical Standards for public officials and employees. Tapos meron tayong RA 3019, which is the Anti-Graft and Corrupt Practices Act. At meron tayo yung 9485 Anti-Red Tape Act of 2007. So ilan ito sa mga, of course, yung admin law, which is the EO 292 na ang pumirma pa dyan ay walang iba kundi ang dating Pangulong Corazon Aquino. At lahat po ito ay mandato ng Civil Service Commission na ipatupad ang lahat ng mga provisions na ito alinsunod sa hangarin ng ating Administrasyon Aquino na isuportahan at isulong ng puspusan ang tuwid na daan.
Maganda po yan at marami po kayong mga na-mention na batas. Marami rin pong mga inilatag na provision yung UNCAC. Ito na po yung ikalawa nilang conference. How are we complying, sir?
Mukhang maayos naman tayo. In fact, we underwent an assessment by a international panel of experts on ways to prevent corruption. So maraming mga aspeto itong state conference on the compliance of the Philippine government to the provisions of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. So meron dyan patungkol sa mga preventive measures. Alam mo, ang korupsyon, hindi lang yung nangyari na at saka mo mahuhuliin o at saka mo magawa. Ay dapat may mga nakalatag na mga preventive measures. So andyan din yung criminalization aspect ng mga corrupt activities at pagsunod sa enforcement ng mga batas. Tapos andyan din yung mga asset recovery. Ilan ito sa mga aspeto na nakapaloob doon sa ating state conference.
Sir, isa po sa mga pinagmumulan ng korupsyon yung red tape. Paano po natin binabawasan yung red tape sa ating mga ahensya ng pamahalaan para po ma-prevent din yung korupsyon?
Well, alam mo, itong red tape ay tinutugunan direktamente ng Civil Service Commission sa pamamagitan ng Anti-Red Tape Act of 2007 na kung saan ay iniutos natin sa mga frontline service offices kaya sa legislative, sa judiciary o sa executive branches of government, basta may frontline services, ay dapat sumunod sila sa Anti-Red Tape Act. At ang mga bahagi ng Anti-Red Tape Act na mga napakamahalaga at dapat talaga sundin ng mga frontline service offices and their heads, ay ito yung pagpapalagay ng Citizens Charter na kung saan nakalagay yung mga hakbang ng bawat proseso, singil. Importante yung transparent yung singil. Kasi kung hindi mo ipapublish yung singil, doon nagkakaroon ng lagayan under the table, including the table, ika nga. So, ito ang dapat maiwasan at kailangan meron din malinaw na anti-fixer campaign materials. Nakalagay yung mga litrato ng mga kilalang mga fixers at nakalagay na ekisyon na hindi dapat nakikipag-ugnayan sa mga ganitong personalidad. Tapos meron tayong no lunch break policy. Ito talaga napaka mahalaga nito at dapat binabantayan ng mga heads of offices na ang kanilang mga kawani ay patuloy ang serbisyo kahit na tanghali na. Although, hindi may sabihin na kapag kami no lunch break doesn't mean no lunch. Shifting ka lang, mas maaga yung iba, na kakain ng lunch, no? Tapos meron din tayong dapat presence of the Public Assistance and Complaints Desk. Dapat din maayos sa mga banyo. Ako, tinitingnan ko yung mga banyo. Dahil isang patunay yan kung seryoso yung frontline service office sa pagbigay ng dekalidad na serbisyo kung malinis yung banyo.
Maraming salamat po sa inyo, Civil Service Commission Chairman Francisco Duque.
Maraming salamat.
Ang Second State Conference on UNCAC Implementation and Review na ginaganap po ngayon, una sa lahat ay naglalayon na palakasin pa ang commitment ng Pilipinas sa advokasya ng United Nations sa paglaban sa korupsyon. Layon din ng pagpupulong na ito na pasalamatan ang Pangulo sa pagpapatupad ng Executive Order No. 171, creating an interagency committee to oversee the review, implementation, and monitoring of the United Nations Convention on o Against Corruption o UNCAC bilang tugon sa commitment ng Pilipinas dito. At bukod dito, bakay din ng State Conference na palakasin pa ang pakikiisa ng iba't ibang government institutions sa bansa gaya ng Senado, Kongreso, Korte Suprema, Commission on Audit, Civil Service Commission, Commission on Elections, Commission on Human Rights, national at local government agencies at ng pribadong sektor sa pagpapatupad at pagmonitor ng UNCAC, partikular na sa corruption prevention initiatives. At dumating na po dito sa Heroes Hall ng Palasyo ng Malacanan ang Pangulong Benigno S.
May we request everyone to please be seated? The UNCAC report identified gaps, challenges, and measures that need to be done by the Philippine government to deliver the policy responses would be the key leaders of our nation. To start with, may we ask the Honorable Ombudsman Conchita Carpio Morales to deliver her policy response.
Your Excellency, President Benigno S. Aquino III, Senate President Franklin Drilon, House Speaker Feliciano Boalmonte Jr., Chief Justice Maria Lourdes Sereno, honorable members of the Cabinet, the Judiciary, and the Chambers of Congress, other distinguished officials of the various government agencies represented this morning, esteemed partners in the anti-corruption efforts, ladies and gentlemen, a pleasant morning. In the advent of the Anti-Corruption Month, the Second State Conference on UNCAC Implementation and Review jumpstarts a month-long series of activities designed to create awareness among the people on the adverse effects of corruption as mandated by Republic Act number 10589. This state conference is an annual mechanism to draw consensus and effect validation of the country's compliance with its obligations under the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, or UNCAC. The Philippines may be one of the few countries, if not the only democratic country in the world, where the heads of the three branches of government gather together to uphold the noble objectives of the UNCAC. In the course of sustaining the momentum spawned by the maiden state conference a year ago, I am pleased to share with you this year several positive updates. First, the Office of the Ombudsman, in partnership with the Office of the President through the Office of the Deputy Executive Secretary for Legal Affairs, or ODESLA, conducted follow-up activities during the year on the implementation of the UNCAC chapters on criminalization and international cooperation. With the help of 6 multi-sectoral working groups, measures were identified to address the listed challenges posed by peer reviewers from Egypt and Bangladesh, as embodied in a report which was discussed in detail by DESLA Undersecretary Michael Aguinaldo a while ago. Second, pursuant to the Memorandum of Agreement between the Office of the President and the Office of the Ombudsman, the joint OP-OMB Technical Working Group lost no time in establishing UNCAC implementation and review mechanisms and operationalizing, the implementation of the Integrity Management Program, or IMP. Noteworthy is the issuance by His Excellency of Executive Order number 171, last September 5, 2014, which created an interagency multi-sectoral committee to oversee the review, implementation, and monitoring of the UNCAC. Moreover, the IMP Management Committee has just published the IMP Handbook and has been implementing the extended pilot run of the IMP in 5 executive agencies, as mentioned a while ago, and that's the Department of Justice, the DPWH, the DOH, the BIR, and the DSWD. Third, as early as the first quarter of 2014, the joint TWD has agreed to prioritize 5 legislative agenda in the 16th Congress based on preparedness, urgency, and probability of passage. These are: 1, the amendment of the Code of Conduct and Ethical Standards for public officials and employees; 2, the passage of law criminalizing the act of active and passive trading in influence; 3, the passage of the Freedom of Information Act; 4, the passage of a mandatory law strengthening the Witness Protection Act, and the passage of Whistleblowers Act; 5, the passage of a law creating additional divisions of the Sandigan Bayan, and the passage of law possibly increasing the number of justices of the Sandigan Bayan. This year, the country has gone beyond the minimum of what is required of it as a state party to the UNCAC. A preliminary assessment of the country's compliance with the UNCAC chapters on preventive measures and asset recovery was conducted with the contribution of the newly established and newly constituted multi-sectoral clusters. This is in preparation for the second review cycle, which will take place sometime between 2015 and 2020. As early as now, more or less 90 measures have been identified for consideration in improving compliance with these 2 UNCAC chapters. In a related development, the Ombudsman Legislative Liaison Team is proposing 5 legislative measures or reform packages to sustain the gains of good governance. And I don't have to mention them because it was mentioned a while ago by Odesla, Chair, Secretary Aguinaldo. To address delay in the resolution of graft and corruption cases, a number of reforms in the Sandigan Bayan have been proposed. And these are, and as I mentioned a while ago, the creation of more divisions and the creation of more positions for justices. To strengthen its institutional capacity, the Office of the Ombudsman also seeks to upgrade employment or employee skills, augment compensation benefits, and enhance fiscal autonomy through, among other things, the installation of an Ombudsman Academy, which will act as both an in-house repository of skill resources and a revenue-earning training facility. To expedite the recovery of stolen assets and illegal wealth, the Office of the Ombudsman proposes several amendments to the forfeiture law, like, for instance, the removal of the preliminary investigation states to facilitate the immediate filing of forfeiture cases, to forestall the dissipation of assets, and the creation of an asset disposal management center or corporation. And to date, at least 11 pertinent bills are in the legislative mill of the 16th Congress, aimed at strengthening the mechanism for asset recovery. Moreover, to strengthen the investigative and prosecutorial powers of the Ombudsman, the office is advocating for provisions on contempt powers, grant of regulated wiretapping, and increased immunities and legal protection for ombudsman investigators, prosecutors, and officers. Further, the office is one in seeking to enhance the country's implementation of the UNCAC by proposing the criminalization in trading influence and bribery of foreign public officials and officials of public international organizations and the strengthening of the Witness Protection Program. The enactment of such law shall enable the office to carry out its functions more effectively and free from any undue influence through the grant and utilization of necessary material resources and specialized staff consistent with the prescription of the convention. Of equal importance are the activities of the Interagency Anti-Corruption Coordinating Council, or the YAGC. As part of the YAGC's strategic plan, it plans to roll out the YAGC revised guidelines on cooperation, publish an integrated anti-graft investigation and prosecution manual, and develop an integrated case management system for graft and corruption cases. It is also intended to advocate the passage of a law or chapter formally creating the council. The added value of adopting the UNCAC as an anti-corruption framework is the realization that all sectors of society must work together to combat corruption under the overarching maxim that fighting corruption is one of the finest expressions of patriotism. The country, however, needs more patriots who will work hand in hand in combating corruption and consequently attaining greater prosperity for a greater number of people. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you very much, ma'am. To deliver the policy response from the Judiciary, the Honorable Chief Justice Maria Lourdes A. Sereno.
Your Excellency, President Benigno Aquino, Senate President Franklin Drilon, Speaker of the House Feliciano Belmonte Jr., Ombudsman Conchito Carpio Morales, Secretary Laila de Lima, Executive Secretary Paquito Ochoa, members of international organizations, members of the Cabinet, members of the Legislature, LGU officials, ambassadors, other dignitaries, friends, good morning to all of you. This is the first audience that responds this way. Thank you for that very warm response. But I am here basically to talk about the judiciary's view on corruption. And I believe that corruption, like poverty, is a multi-headed monster that we really need to definitely slay once and for all for our country's progress. Certainly, the responsibility does not rest on the office of the Ombudsman alone, but it must also be the personal crusade of every citizen. In this light, may I please laud the efforts of the special working groups composed of representatives from the relevant government branches, agencies, and institutions, as well as civil society organizations, with the guidance of the Joint Office of the President Ombudsman Technical Working Group, when they review the Philippine Country Review Report to further enhance our compliance with the UNCAC. Such undertaking is a solid example of the multi-sectoral and concerted cooperation needed in the fight against corruption. But I note that many, if not nearly all, of the challenges, gaps, and measures that have been identified in the reports made this morning on the implementation of Chapters 3 and 4 of the UNCAC require legislative intervention through amendment of existing laws or the passage of new ones. That is why the response of the judiciary this morning, by way of my statement, cannot mirror the legislative remediation that the present state of the review contemplates. The judiciary's active participation in the review, I understand, is expected much later. It cannot be unduly involved in reviewing the legislative agenda against corruption, as the laws that are being reviewed or proposed may likely be raised before the courts. This is the limitation of my role this morning, but this does not mean that the judiciary has a less significant role in the fight against corruption. We carry the fight, first and foremost, into our constitutional prerogative in the administration and supervision of courts, judges, and court personnel. And these pertain to Chapter 2, Article 11, Paragraph 1 of the UNCAC as to judicial independence and integrity. I have said much earlier that we must strive towards a status where our people will instinctively give the benefit of doubt in favor of the integrity of the judge and accept a decision as a result of the conscientious evaluation of the facts, evidence, and the law, rather than immediately condemning the judge as corrupt. This is by operating the standard of the good judge, which I have often articulated, one whose decision is beyond the reach of money or power. Towards this end, we have engaged in serious house cleaning, a painful but necessary process. Part of this process involves the conduct of investigations, some of which we have done on our own initiative. We intend to beef up our capability to conduct such investigations, knowing that the quality of these determine the outcome and its credibility to the public. One such investigation has in fact recently resulted in a decision dismissing a justice of the anti-graft court, no less, the Sandigan Bayan. Another investigation, one that arose out of information given by the public, has resulted in the Supreme Court directing the Court of Appeals to investigate 4 RTC judges for irregularities in the conduct of one judges' association. Although these 2 incidents are not about direct acts of corruption per se, they seriously, if proven to be true, undermine the credibility of the judiciary, one which we are striving so hard to restore. Many more decisions of this kind will be forthcoming if only the public will take up the challenge that I have hurled as early as October of 2012 for them to come forward and file cases against those members of ours. But with those cases must come evidence. For this is where the whole difficulty lies. And I have already more than once articulated the impossibility of convicting or dismissing without evidence. Nevertheless, aside from the serious house cleaning that we are doing, we believe that we need to push the agenda of judicial reform twinned not only by a corruption flank, but also by a process reform flank. And this I have done in a large way through the instance of the Justice Sector Coordinating Council, in order that we can promote a culture of accountability and defeat the culture of impunity. Last Friday, together with Secretaries Laila de Lima and Mar Rojas, we launched the first pilot justice zone in Quezon City, an intuitive but revolutionary concept where in a specific locality, a minimum of interagency coordinative reforms are present, rendering that area compliant with a set of rating standards determined by the Council. These justice zones will therefore set the standard for public accountability in the justice sector. And I'm very proud to say that I have two very, very reliable partners in this regard. The silo mentality that used to pervade the justice sector agencies before has resulted in problems that plague the system, but now they are being gradually addressed through enhanced coordination, information sharing, and leveraging of technology. We hope to create justice zones in more areas throughout the country soon. Now, in the judiciary, we continue to push for the modernization of our courts and automation of our processes because we strongly believe that technology can be an effective anti-corruption tool as it minimizes the areas of human intervention. Now, these in turn can be fertile breeding grounds for corruption, that is, human intervention. One example is the e-subpoena, which has resulted in the improvement of the attendance of police witnesses in Quezon City, which is now at 97% compliance. Of course, such initiatives require funding, and this is the reason why we continually appeal for additional budgetary support. But more than processes, programs, and projects, the fight against corruption starts with people. I have supported the efforts of legal educators to strengthen ethical values in the law school curriculum. The qualifying exam for lawyers, the bar examinations, now include questions of ethical dimensions in every bar subject, emphasizing the fact that without ethical standards, we are not a profession worthy of its name. The Philippine Judicial Academy, the training school for judges and court personnel, continue to conduct regular training in the Code of Judicial Conduct and the new Code for Judicial Personnel. We have also instituted measures for greater transparency and public participation in the Judicial and Bar Council, which is in charge of the selection for nominees to the bench to make sure that those of questionable integrity are weeded out in the first instance. Maybe this can be taken as an indicator of the vigor in the judiciary now, but I can assure you that in the JBC, we are now facing a very welcome problem, and that is for a single slot, for example, in the NCJR, we have more than 130 applicants. So we seem to be an attractive destination. The court itself, through its public information office, has become more open to the public. For instance, for the first time in history, and under my watch, oral arguments are now accessible in real time through audio live streaming on YouTube. Documents of the court's financial accounts are also uploaded to the court's website and downloadable by the public. And on request and upon specification of reasonable grounds, SAL-ends of members of the judiciary are released to the public, even to members of the media who write extensively about them, print them, show pictures of them over television, which is the reason why at many times I find people camped outside my home. So thank you very much to the media. But let me tell you, for example, that to clarify, we never intended to deny the BIR, the SAL-ends per se. It was the way that the request is made that is important for the court. And as the media has reported, she now can get a copy of the SAL-ends of the Sandigan Bayan Justices. We have been closely also discussing how to make the SAL-end law more effective while balancing whatever rights of privacy those of us still have or are entitled to in the judiciary. In sum, while I am not privileged to discuss with you at length many of the reform measures that we are already undertaking right now, because I believe that the turn of the judiciary will come soon for this kind of country review. Let me state that the judiciary views its role in the fight against corruption as part of an integrated and concerted effort to make programs, processes, and projects more transparent and accessible to the people. And it is only the way for the people to start believing in the judiciary, and eventually that we can have, in future, have a judiciary that the people can be truly proud of. God bless the Philippines and the Filipino people.
Thank you very much, ma'am. As a state party, the Philippines is obliged to implement preventive and punitive anti-corruption measures, including asset recovery, affecting their laws, institutions, and practices. The role of the legislative branch, therefore, cannot be overemphasized. To deliver the policy response from the House of Representatives, the Honorable Speaker Feliciano Belmonte, Jr.
His Excellency the President, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, my colleague, Senate President Franklin Drilon, Ombudsman Conchita Carpio Morales, the officials from the UN, the World Bank, the members of the Cabinet, Executive Secretary, Justice Secretary, the Chairman and members of the COA, Civil Service Commission, and other constitutional bodies, the presiding justice of the Court of the Sandigan Bayan, and colleagues in government, in the private sector, ladies and gentlemen. Today we come together once more to commend the task force and everyone responsible for the steady progress in our commitment to the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. While our compliance to the convention earns for us an esteemed standing in the community of nations, its more meaningful benefit is the societal and economic transformation ushered by the minimization or elimination of corruption. Simply put, the fighting words of the President, kung walang korap, walang mahirap. That poverty is a stubborn problem in our country is easily the most trite statement one can say in any development forum such as this one. What many of us fail to do is to make or own up to this simple connection. We are poor because we have failed to grow our economy at a fast and sustainable manner. We are poor because while growth is achieved, it is not equitably shared. Many of you here today can more adequately and more competently explain the wherefores of poor economic performance and income inequality. I hope that you will also highlight, as it should be highlighted, that corruption is a common explanation for both these maladies. For example, no matter how willing and capable business is to actively contribute to economic growth, business activities can only thrive in a playing field that is level and fair, where the level of risks is low and manageable and returns are appropriate to investments. Corruption is anathema to this kind of business environment. Furthermore, there will be this less income inequality if the poor have access to basic public services such as health and education, and to economic opportunities such as quality jobs and employment. Unfortunately, however, it is not the poor, but the economically powerful and the well-connected who get special treatment and a disproportionate share of government resources. Why? It's the big C, cancer of another form, yet just as deadly as the cancer our national hero described over a century ago. It was true then, sadly, continues to be true. The sadder truth now is that the cancer is perpetrated not by foreign colonialists, but by our own countrymen. Still, the gains that we have achieved a truly effective strategy in achieving inclusive economic growth. The House of Representatives, and there are several members of us present, is fully supportive of and committed to the government's commitment to the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. A number of the proposed legislative measures to address the gaps in our compliance to our commitment to the Convention are already part of our legislative priorities in the House as well as in the Senate, if I may speak for the Senate President. These include, number one, an act penalizing influence peddling, already passed on third reading by the House of Representatives and transmitted to the Senate, defines and criminalizes influence peddling in line with the provisions of the UNCAC. Whistleblowers' protection, security, and benefits. The bill provides a clear definition of a whistleblower and offers entitlements to ensure the security and alleviate the economic dislocation of the whistleblower. It also clearly defines the duties and responsibilities of whistleblowers. Amendments to the Witness Protection, Security and Benefit Act. The proposed amendments, among others, widen the coverage and enhance the benefits and protection given to witnesses while defining more clearly the duties and responsibilities expected of them. Amendments to the Ombudsman Act. When enacted, this measure will strengthen the institutional capacity of the Office of the Ombudsman, enhance the fiscal autonomy, and improve the employees' capacity and welfare, and define its authority to place elective and appointed officials on preventive suspension with finality. Amendments to the Sandigan Bayan Act. First, the amendments will broaden the Sandigan Bayan's investigative and prosecutorial powers. And second, the proposed measure will strengthen the functional and structural organization of the Sandigan Bayan. Not only adding more groups to the Sandigan Bayan, but also examining its coverage, because there are just too much functions that should be devolved to the RTC and other courts, and this clog up the work of the Sandigan Bayan. Amendments to the Code of Conduct and Ethics standards for public officials and employees. These include the definition of the term public officials. As suggested by the United Nations Convention Against Corruption Interagency Committee, we will make sure that the definition includes foreign public officials and officials of public international organizations performing public functions or service under our laws or our territory. Amendments to the Corporation Code of the Philippines. The intention of these amendments is to fortify the regulatory powers of the Securities and Exchange Commission with the power to issue ex parte cease and desist orders when the corporate vehicle is used for fraud or corrupt practices. Freedom of Information Act. By mandating the disclosure of public documents, the proposed measure seeks to promote greater transparency and accountability in the government, thereby discouraging graft and corrupt practices. All these proposed measures have received the approval of the relevant committees and are in the final stages of report preparation. By next year, we expect these bills to be discussed and approved in the plenary sessions. Let me also express our support for other legislative measures proposed by the Interagency Committee. They are the following: repeal of PD 1069 and the enactment of a comprehensive law on extradition that is consistent with the international best practices. Enactment of a law on the interstate transfer of sentenced persons to establish a uniform, consistent, practical procedures that is in conformity with international standards. Amendments to the anti-money laundering law to include UNCAC-related offenses as predicate crimes, and codifications of these laws pertaining to graft and corruption. Today's forum is a solid indication that we have a reliable national and international infrastructure in the fight against corruption. It is also a stern reminder that the fight can only be won if we deliberately and intelligently use these weapons without delay, fear, or favor. Let us remember, too, that compliance with the Convention Against Corruption is merely an intermediate, however worthy, goal. In the end, we will be judged by how much we have led our people closer to a life of integrity and a full sense of self-determination. Sama-sama nating labanan ang korupsyon, ang kanser ng ating lipunan. Thank you. Good morning. Mabuhay.
Thank you very much, sir. The Senate ratified the convention on November 6, 2006. This chamber, from the onset up to the present, has been an indispensable partner in government's fight against corruption. To deliver its response, we have the Honorable Senate President, Franklin M. Drilon.
Your Excellency, President Benigno S. Aquino III, Speaker Feliciano R. Belmonte Jr., the Chief Justice Maria Lourdes Sereno, Ombudsman Conchita Carpio Morales, members of the Cabinet led by Executive Secretary Ochoa, Secretary De Lima, heads and members of the different constitutional agencies present here today, fellow workers in government, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, a pleasant good morning to all of you. At about this time last year, we gathered for the first state conference on the UNCAC implementation review. Today is an opportune time for us to sit down again and see what we have done for the past 1 year. Indeed, Your Excellency's commitment and sincerity in pushing for the governance reform of agenda have gained recognition and appreciation of the international community, as evidenced by the country's remarkable improvement in the World Economic Forum Global Competitiveness Rankings and the attainment of investment grade status. The relentless pursuit of the platform Daang Matuwid encourages the active participation of our people in the governance process, as can be seen in their zealous evaluation of government activities and in holding those in positions of power accountable. As signatory to the UN Convention Against Corruption, the Philippines has never wavered in its commitment to intensify the campaign against corrupt practices. Your Excellency, the Senate is your administration's veritable partner in promoting transparency and accountability. Today, we continue to push boundaries in search for viable and lasting solutions to the scourge of corruption. Yes, indeed, there can be no better proof of our relentless pursuit of transparency than the investigation done by the Blue Ribbon Committee of all these reported anomalies. Last week, the Senate passed on third reading the proposed General Appropriations Act for 2015, which is now before the Bicameral Conference Committee. It is the most scrutinized budget, Mr. President, as its provisions were carefully dissected and analyzed to ensure that it is insulated from loopholes where graft and corruption can thrive. Mr. President, there is no more PDAF in the budget which you have submitted to Congress, and that we have sustained. There will be no PDAF in this budget. The legislators will have no participation in terms of identifying projects after the budget is signed, as which was the source, which was the basis of the Supreme Court's decision led by our good friend, the Chief Justice, in striking down that practice. We have also passed on third reading the proposed Freedom of Information Act, which seeks to implement a policy of full public disclosure of all government transactions involving public interest with appropriate safeguards on matters of national security and ample protection for the right of individuals to privacy. Shortly, Mr. President, in close coordination with Speaker Belmonte and the leadership of the House, we will present to you a landmark legislation which will amend the Sandigan Bayan Law in order to enable the Sandigan Bayan to resolve cases against erring public officials and employees through the introduction of innovations to the anti-graft court, such as the concept of a justice designate, so that a single justice can hear evidence without the need of the three justices being present always, the modification of the voting requirement, the transfer of jurisdiction of certain minor cases to the regional trial courts. What is important, Mr. President, is that we will add 2 more divisions in agreement with the Sandigan Bayan, Presiding Justice Tang here. We will add 2 more divisions, which will consist of 8 justices, the venue of which, or the location of which, will be left to the Supreme Court to decide. What is critical is that we will add 6 more justices to enable the Sandigan Bayan to dispose of these cases at a faster rate. Of course, Mr. President, the Sandigan Bayan will have our support in terms of the budget. We will provide the budget so that this can be implemented during your time. We have also adopted Resolution number 54, commending the Integrity Initiative, a private sector-driven effort which aims to institutionalize integrity standards among all sectors of society. Mr. President, we are aware that there is a recommendation for the amendment of the outdated extradition law as part of the recommendation for compliance of certain articles found in the UNCAC Chapter 4 International Cooperation. We are awaiting the output of the UNCAC Technical Working Group on this point, and will immediately act on this once we have the recommendation of the Technical Working Group. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, for decades, corruption has impeded development and denied the majority of Filipinos the opportunity to live a prosperous and dignified life. However, for the past 4 years, your administration has shown strong political will to steer our country in the path of good governance. Through the joint effort of the executive branch, both houses of Congress, the judiciary, the private sector, and the Filipino people, we have made huge gains in our governance agenda. Nevertheless, Mr. President, we acknowledge that much more needs to be done. Yes, much more needs to be done. But what is important and critical is that we have a president, we have a chief executive who has a zero tolerance for corruption, and and we have a president who relentlessly pursues the platform of good governance, the platform upon which he was brought to power. We are all aware that our people are expecting this government to give them a chance at leading a respectable and abounding life in a graft-free society. Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, we are committed not to let them down. Thank you very much, and the President, good morning.
Mabuhay po kayo, Mr. Senate President. May we ask the Honorable Executive Secretary and the Honorable Ombudsman to present to His Excellency the second State Conference resolution. Honorable Ombudsman.
Ang pinakahintay nating lahat, ang Pangulo ng Republika ng Pilipinas, ang kagalang-galang Benigno Simeon Aquino III.
Maupo tayo lahat. Magandang umaga po. Senate President Franklin Drilon, Speaker Feliciano Belmonte, members of the House present, Chief Justice Maria Lourdes Sereno, the Ombudsman, Conchita Carpio Morales, members of the Cabinet present, headed by the Executive Secretary, Sandigan Bayan Presiding Justice Amparo Kabatayatang, Commissioner Kim Henares, Chairperson Grace Pulido Tan, Chairperson Francisco Duque, Mr. Terence Jones, Mr. Marcel Mario Calel, Mr. Moto Konishi, Development Partners, Civil Society members, UNCAC Interagency Committee, fellow workers in government, honored guests, mga minamahal ko mga kababayan, muli magandang umaga po sa inyo lahat. Sabi po ng Executive Secretary, pinakahihintay. Hindi ko alam kung pagkatapos ko, dahil kainan na, or sa wakas natapos na rin. Pinaka-problema po nung pinakahuli nagsasalita, parang buti lang sinundan ko, magagaling. No? So, problema ko, makumpara tayo sa paksabihin. Kaya nangyari at mukhang wala sa tiyempo ang ating Pangulo itong araw na ito. Pero bago natin makalimutan, Butch, I hope you took note of the budgetary requirements of the Judiciary that should be attended to post haste. And since the approving authority is present also, perhaps we can lobby them for the speedy inclusion of what is necessary to help the Judiciary in our common fight against corruption, amongst others. Making sure that we are compliant with all the directives. Okay. When I was a senator, I was rather notorious for my scrutiny and persistence during budget deliberations. This was because I believed then, as I do now, that for government to focus on its reason for being and to serve the people, it must have the wherewithal to do so. That wherewithal is embodied in our national budget. And if funds are lost due to leaks or holes in our systems, if funds are wasted because of corruption, then the Filipino people will be deprived of the benefits they are entitled to in the present and also deprived of a better future. When we embarked on the straight path, we knew that each step we took had to be methodical. Each hindrance would have to be dismantled before we could make true progress. As you may remember, the first executive order I signed created a truth commission intended to investigate allegations of graft and corruption as the first step towards accountability. We all know, unfortunately, that this was blocked by the Supreme Court, which was then led by Chief Justice Corona. Yet we persisted. Anomalous projects were canceled. Government-owned and controlled corporations that were once the cash cows of a corrupt few underwent reforms. We likewise turned our attention to budget and procurement, which was significant in light of the situation we came across. Only 6.5% of the 2010 budget, amounting to 100 billion pesos, was left when this administration took office. We also inherited the proposed 2011 budget, which has to be given to Congress roughly about 2 months into office. Okay? Even with these challenges, we embarked on serious reforms. Bidding and procurement processes were tightened to minimize opportunities for corruption. Zero-based budgeting helped us put an end to programs that were inefficient, wasteful, or easily manipulated by the corrupt. And in 2012, we finally had the wherewithal to craft a budget under which each peso government spent would have real and concrete benefits for the Filipino people. The first review cycle for the Philippines' compliance with the United Nations Convention Against Corruption covers that crucial period. The transition from the final years of my predecessor's term to our time in office, in which we undertook all these reforms and many more. As validated by both Egypt and Bangladesh, our peer review partners, the results of the first review cycle are indeed positive. We complied with 55 out of the 66 provisions of criminalization and law enforcement, 48 out of 54 provisions of international cooperation. These are encouraging figures, of course, but this review is just a summary of what has taken place over 5 years. By its very nature, the review will not show the whole picture, whether of our efforts in criminalization, law enforcement, and international cooperation, or our administration's entire multifaceted fight against corruption. I already spoke of some of these initiatives during last year's conference. The websites through which our countrymen can better understand the budget and the budgeting process, and also report corrupt practices of officials, are still active and online for everyone's use. Since we last met, our administration has filed an additional 159 cases against smugglers, tax evaders, and erring government officials through the Run After the Smugglers, Run After Tax Evaders, and Revenue Integrity Protection Service programs. Prominent lawmakers, former heads of GOCCs and government agencies, and others in the private sector who conspired to steal from the people through the Priority Development Assistance Fund have been arrested and are now undergoing the appropriate processes to determine accountability. We should emphasize these are only the initial cases filed. More will come once the necessary evidence is assembled. There are new measures to speak of as well. For instance, one of the innovations we introduced in the budgeting process this year is the GAA as release document system. Through this system, the budget serves as the release document itself the moment it is signed into law. This meant that as soon as 2014 began, the majority of allocations were released to agencies, enabling them to begin implementing projects, thus cascading benefits down to our people at the soonest possible time. We must also not forget our efforts to empower the Filipino people, which have been intensified as a result of these good governance reforms. Massive investments into social services, health, and education continue, with 37% of the proposed 2015 budget allocated for social services. We were able to do this, and we will remind everybody, without raising taxes except for sin tax reform, which is directly geared towards improving the overall health of the Filipino people. Perhaps we should emphasize that again. Without further burdening our people, just doing what is right, we have been empowering them. The conditional cash transfer program has grown by massive leaps and bounds, from around 800,000 beneficiary households when we took office to more than 4 million household beneficiaries today. And it has now been expanded to include families with children up to 18 years of age. Critical backlogs in classrooms, textbooks, and school seats have been ended through the hard work of our Department of Education and its partners. Indeed, so much progress has been made in our drive to weed out corruption in government, and in so doing, better our capacity to serve the people. But as everyone here knows, especially those in public service, we must always remember, numbers and targets will only get us so far. The end of the UNCAC review cycle does not mean that we have accomplished what we have set out to do. As public servants, our goals must expand and evolve with the passage of time. We must always seek to build on the achievements of the past and the present. Events like this remind us of our responsibilities and give us the chance to renew our commitment to each other as colleagues in government and to the wider society. let me say, it is encouraging to see that you have not grown weary of your jobs. In fact, it seems as if you are only asking for even more work, since one of today's resolutions is the request for an executive order institutionalizing an integrity management program throughout all levels of government, with the UNCAC as a guide. Rest assured, I will only be too happy to give you more to do if it means we are able to achieve our goals sooner rather than later. If I remember correctly, the Executive Secretary, in his quest for more efficiency, gave this particular document for me to sign early last night. So the request has already been done. More is at stake here. More is at stake here than just the implementation of a single project or the attainment of 100% compliance with UNCAC. With the 2016 elections not too far off, let us always remember that we are working to make change permanent, to make the commitment to good governance a commitment that lasts beyond this administration. We are working to rid the Philippines of the corruption that has tainted its reputation and plagued it for so long. We are working to institutionalize a legacy that finds its roots in the mindset of our countrymen, who will never again settle for anything less than true public service. Thank you. Good day.
That ends this morning's program.
Conference on UN Commission Against Corruption, Implementation and Review na kasalukuyan pong ginaganap dito sa Heroes Hall sa Palasyo ng Malacanang. Inihayag ng Pangulo na malayo na ang narating ng pamahalaan sa laban nito kontra korupsyon. Ibinida ng Pangulo Aquino ang kanyang advokasya kontra korupsyon mula nung siya ay senador hanggang mahalal bilang Pangulo. Sa katunayan, isaan niya sa kanyang unang ginawa ng maluklok sa pwesto ay ang pagbuo ng isang Truth Commission para labanan ang katiwalian at imbestigahan ang mga alegasyon ng korupsyon sa pamahalaan. Matatandaan namang ito ay hinarang ng Korte Suprema na nooy pinamumunuan ng na-impeach na si dating Chief Justice Renato Corona. Sa kabila nito ay nagpatuloy pa rin umano ang kanyang administrasyon sa pagsasagawa ng reforma. Sa kabila umano ng kanyang dinatnang korupsyon ay naging positibo ang naging unang review ng UNCAC noong nakaraang taon. Bagamat marami pa ayon sa Pangulo ang dapat gawin pagdating sa pagsugpo sa korupsyon sa gobyerno, ay hindi natitinag ang kanyang administrasyon. Sa katunayan, patuloy daw ang paghahabol at pagsasampa ng mga kaso laban sa mga smugglers, tax evaders at mga tiwaling opisyal ng pamahalaan. Kabilang din sa mga tinututukan ng Administrasyong Aquino ay ang makabagong proseso pagdating sa release ng budget at ang pagpapaigting ng social services tulad ng edukasyon, pagtatatag ng karagdagang classrooms at ang conditional cash transfer program para sa mga pinakamahihirap na mamamayan. Ibinida rin ng Pangulo ang nilagdaang executive order na naglalayong i-institutionalize ang Integrity Management Program sa lahat ng antas ng pamahalaan. Bagamat marami na ang nagawa ng pamahalaan sa paglaban kontra katiwalian, paalala ng Pangulo bilang mga kawani ng gobyerno ay hindi dapat mapagod sa kanilang dedikasyon sa sinumpaang tungkulin sa bayan. Umaasa ang Pangulo Aquino na ang pagbabagong nasimulan na ay magiging pangmatagalan at magsisilbing pamana ng kanyang administrasyon pagbaba niya sa pwesto sa 2016. At bago yan ay nagsalita ang ilan sa mga opisyal ng pamahalaan, kabilang na po si Chief Justice Maria Lourdes Sereno, Ombudsman Conchita Carpio Morales, House Speaker Feliciano Belmonte Jr., at Senate President Franklin Drilon. Isa sa mga notable na inanunsyo ni Senate President Drilon sa kanyang naging talumpati ay ang paglilinaw niya na wala na talagang PDAF sa national budget para sa susunod na taon. At ito ay pinalakpakan nga ng mga nandirito. Matatandaan po natin na ito ang isa sa mga tinutukan ng Administrasyong Aquino noong mga nakalipas na panahon, ang tutok sa katiwalian doon sa PDAF scam na kasalukuyan pa rin isa sa mga issue na tinatalakay sa Senado. Ang nakikita niyo po ngayon ay mga eksena dito po sa loob ng Heroes Hall sa Palasyo ng Malacanang, kung saan nagkakaroon po ng photo opportunity ang kasama ang Pangulo, ang mga dumadalong opisyal. Nandito po ang ilan sa mga representatives ng United Nations at ng World Bank at iba pang mga development partners ng Pilipinas, ilan sa mga cabinet officials, at mga ilang pang matataas na kawani ng pamahalaan at mga government heads. At bago po ako magpaalam, nais ko po nga pasalamatan ang RTVM, ang Telebisyon ng Bayan, ang IBC at ang Radyo ng Bayan. Maraming salamat po sa inyong pagsaksi sa Second State Conference on United Nations Convention Against Corruption, Implementation and Review dito po sa Malacanang. Muli ako po si Cathy San Gabriel, isang magandang araw, Pilipinas.